The cool water splashed against her parched lips as Claire drank deeply from the mason jar, her expensive designer clothes coated in a layer of road dust. Across the weathered kitchen table, Matthew Walsh studied his unexpected guest with curious eyes, calloused hands wrapped around his own jar of water. "You saved my life today," she said simply, her voice still hoarse from the heat. Matthew shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. Claire's lips curved into a knowing smile. "No, they wouldn't have. And that's exactly why this place is perfect." She reached into her bag and pulled out detailed blueprints that made Matthew's eyes widen in disbelief. His struggling farm, the land he was about to lose spread across the paper, transformed into something miraculous. Something that could save everything. "I don't understand," he whispered, tracing the outline of what appeared to be his property. "Who are you really?" Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched land, scorching everything in its relentless path. The weather vane on top of the old barn spun lazily, offering the only movement in the stillness of the afternoon heat. Matthew Walsh wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. His faded blue shirt clung to his back, drenched with sweat from hours of trying to repair the irrigation system that had failed yet again. At 42, Matthew's face told the story of years spent battling the elements, of early mornings and late nights, of hopes that bloomed with every spring planting only to wither with each passing season as debt piled higher. The drought had persisted for 3 summers now, turning what was once fertile land into a dusty expanse that seemed to mock his every effort. "Just hold on a little longer," he muttered to no one in particular, tightening a connection on the ancient pipe system. Water was scarce, but without it, the small plot of vegetables that remained would be lost by nightfall. His eyes drifted to the horizon where heat waves distorted the view, making the distant mountains shimmer like a mirage. The forecast promised no relief, temperatures climbing higher every day, breaking records that had stood for decades. Matthew's farm had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had built the house by hand, log by log, back when the creek ran full year-round, and the soil yielded bounties that could feed a family with plenty left to sell. Now, the creek was just a dusty depression in the earth, and the soil required coaxing and chemicals that Matthew could no longer afford. The bank had been patient, or so they claimed in their letters, filled with terms like forbearance and restructuring options. But patience had its limits, especially when measured in dollars and cents. Last week's letter had been different, with words like foreclosure and 90 days notice that left no room for interpretation. Matthew had until the end of summer to come up with payments he couldn't possibly make. He straightened up, wincing at the pain in his lower back. In his younger days, he could work from sunrise to sunset without feeling it. Now, every movement reminded him that time was not on his side. Not with his body, not with his farm, not with the bank. A thin plume of dust on the horizon caught his attention. It was unusual to see anyone on this road, especially in this heat. The nearest town, Riverdale, was 15 miles away, and nobody had business out here except for the occasional lost tourist or delivery truck. As the dust cloud grew larger, Matthew could make out a vehicle moving slowly, almost hesitantly, along the dirt road that led to his property. It was a sleek car, too nice for these parts, its polished surface reflecting the harsh sunlight. The vehicle moved at a crawl now, as if the driver was searching for something, or perhaps just being cautious on the uneven road. Then, without warning, the car rolled to a stop about a quarter mile from his driveway. Even from this distance, Matthew could see the hood pop open, followed by a billow of steam. "Perfect timing," he muttered, setting down his wrench. Common decency dictated he check on the stranded motorist, though part of him was reluctant to abandon his repair job. Whoever it was had chosen the worst possible day to break down on this stretch of nowhere. As Matthew approached the vehicle, he could see a figure standing beside it, a woman in clothes far too formal for the countryside. She wore a crisp white blouse and tailored pants that looked like they'd cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, Those strands had escaped in the heat and clung to her flushed face. "Car trouble?" Matthew called out as he drew closer. The woman turned, startled by his voice. Relief washed over her features. "Oh, thank goodness. Yes, it just started overheating. I think the radiator might be overheated," Matthew finished for her. "Not surprising in this weather. You've picked a bad day to tour the countryside." She smiled weakly, dabbing at her forehead with a handkerchief that looked too delicate to be of any real use. "I was on my way to Riverdale for a meeting. The GPS suggested this route as a shortcut." Matthew chuckled without humor. "Those things don't account for road conditions. This path hasn't been properly maintained in years." He peered into the open hood, assessing the situation. "Your radiator's bone dry. Engine's too hot to do anything right now. It'll need to cool down before we can add water, and even then, you might have a leak." The woman sighed, looking at her watch with obvious concern. "How long do you think that will take?" "Couple hours at least, in this heat." Matthew gestured to the surrounding landscape, noticing for the first time that her skin had taken on an alarming redness. "You shouldn't stay out in this sun. You're already getting burned." "I'm fine," she insisted, though she swayed slightly on her feet. "I just need to make a call, arrange another ride." She reached into her pocket for her phone, then frowned. "No service. Of course. Network's spotty out here on the best of days," Matthew explained. "Look, my farm's just up there. You can wait in the shade while your car cools down. Use my landline if you need to call someone." She hesitated, clearly weighing her options, though Matthew wasn't sure what alternatives she had. Stay in the scorching heat, or accept help from a stranger. Finally, she nodded. "That's very kind of you. I'm Claire, by the way. Claire Bennett." "Matthew Walsh," he replied, offering a handshake before realizing his palm was dirty from his work. He withdrew it awkwardly. "Sorry about that." "No need to apologize," Claire said, surprising him by extending her hand anyway. Her grip was firmer than he expected, her skin soft against his calloused palm. They began the walk back to the farmhouse, moving slowly under the punishing sun. Matthew noted with concern that Claire's breathing had become labored, and her face had grown even more flushed. "Are you all right?" he asked, slowing his pace. "Just not used to this heat," she admitted, her voice strained. "I spend most of my time in air-conditioned offices." "What kind of work do you do?" Matthew asked, trying to keep the conversation going, to keep her focused as they walked. "I'm in design," she answered vaguely, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground. "Architecture, specifically." Matthew caught her elbow to steady her, alarmed by how hot her skin felt to the touch. "You're burning up. I think you might be suffering from heat exhaustion." "No, I'm fine, really. I just need—" Claire's words slurred suddenly, and before Matthew could react, her knees buckled. He lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. "Claire? Claire!" Matthew lightly patted her cheek, but she was unresponsive, her breathing shallow. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms. Though slender, she was not as light as she appeared, but adrenaline gave Matthew strength as he carried her toward the house with urgent strides. The old farmhouse offered blessed relief from the heat, its thick walls maintaining a temperature several degrees cooler than outside. Matthew laid Claire gently on the worn sofa in the living room, then hurried to wet a cloth with cool water. He placed it on her forehead, noting with alarm how pale she had become despite the sunburn on her cheeks. "Come on, wake up," he murmured, loosening her collar and checking her pulse. It was rapid but strong. Matthew had seen heat exhaustion before, had experienced it himself during particularly brutal harvests. He knew what to do, but that didn't stop the worry from gnawing at him. A stranger had collapsed on his property, and the nearest hospital was 20 miles away. Claire's eyelids fluttered after a few minutes, confusion clouding her gaze as she focused on Matthew's concerned face hovering above her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You passed out from the heat," Matthew explained, relief evident in his tone. "Just lie still. I'm going to get you some water." He returned from the kitchen with a mason jar filled with cool well water. Gently helping Claire to sit up, he held the jar to her lips. Small sips, he instructed. Too much too fast will make you sick. Claire obeyed, drinking slowly, the color gradually returning to her face. Thank you, she whispered between sips. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Matthew shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Like I said, bad day to be out in that sun. What were you thinking, wearing those clothes in this weather? A small smile touched Claire's lips. I wasn't expecting to break down in the middle of nowhere. The meeting in Riverdale was important. I wanted to look professional. Well, you certainly managed that, Matthew said, trying to lighten the mood. Though, I'm not sure the professional look extends to passing out in a farmer's arms. Claire's laugh was weak, but genuine. I suppose not. Speaking of which, I should call to let them know I won't make it. She attempted to stand but wobbled, sinking back onto the sofa. Easy there, Matthew cautioned. You're not going anywhere for a while. The phone's right there if you want to make your call. But then you need to rest. Claire nodded, accepting his assessment. As she reached for the old rotary phone on the side table, Matthew noticed for the first time the expensive watch on her wrist, the diamond studs in her ears. This woman was clearly accustomed to a different world than his crumbling farm. While Claire made her call, speaking in low, professional tones that Matthew tried not to overhear, he busied himself in the kitchen, assembling a simple meal of cold sandwiches and sliced apples from the small orchard behind the house. It wasn't much, but it was the best he could offer an unexpected guest. When he returned to the living room, Claire had finished her call and was leaning back on the sofa, her eyes closed. For a moment, Matthew thought she had fallen asleep, but she opened her eyes at the sound of his footsteps. I hope peanut butter and jelly is okay, he said, setting the plate on the coffee table. Not exactly gourmet, but it'll help get your strength back. It's perfect, Claire assured him, sitting up carefully. And very kind of you. I've rescheduled my meeting for tomorrow. They were understanding, given the circumstances. Matthew sat in the armchair across from her, watching as she took a small bite of the sandwich. So, architecture? That sounds interesting. Claire nodded, chewing thoughtfully before responding. It is. I specialize in sustainable design, creating buildings that work with the environment instead of against it. Sounds fancy, Matthew remarked, unable to keep a hint of defensiveness from his voice. Sustainability was a luxury for those who could afford it. For farmers like him, it was about survival, using whatever methods kept crops growing and bills paid. Environmental impact be damned. If Claire noticed his tone, she didn't acknowledge it. It's practical, actually. Buildings that use less energy, that capture rainwater, that provide natural cooling. It saves money in the long run. Everything saves money in the long run, Matthew said. It's the short run that bankrupts you. Claire studied him, her gaze suddenly more focused, more assessing. You speak from experience. It wasn't a question, but Matthew answered anyway. 4 generations on this land. Might be the last. The way things are going. The drought? The drought? The economy? The banks? Take your pick. Matthew gestured vaguely at the window where the sun-scorched landscape stretched beyond. Farming's not what it used to be. Used to be you could feed a family on 100 acres. Now you need 1,000 to break even, and even that's not guaranteed. Claire set down her sandwich, her expression thoughtful. Have you considered diversifying? Alternative crops, perhaps? Matthew laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. With what capital? Everything I make goes back into keeping this place afloat. And the bank's not exactly eager to extend more credit to a failing farm. I'm sorry, Claire said softly. That was presumptuous of me. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Matthew regretted his harsh words. This woman had shown him nothing but politeness, and here he was, dumping his problems on her. No, I'm sorry. You didn't come here for a sob story about a struggling farmer. Actually, Claire said, surprising him with the intensity in her voice, stories like yours are exactly what I'm interested in. Before Matthew could ask what she meant, a loud knocking at the door interrupted them. He rose, puzzled. Visitors were rare at the best of times, and certainly unexpected in this heat. Opening the door, Matthew found himself face to face with Roy Jenkins, the local mechanic whose tow truck now stood beside Claire's Barras. Stranded vehicle. Got a call about a broken-down car? Roy explained, wiping sweat from his ruddy face. Lady named Bennett. This the right place? Matthew nodded, stepping aside to let Roy enter. She's inside. Suffered a bit of heat exhaustion, so she's resting. Claire had already risen from the sofa at the sound of voices. Mr. Jenkins? Thank you for coming so quickly. Roy removed his cap, suddenly conscious of his appearance in front of the elegant woman. No problem, ma'am. Your car's loaded up. Radiator's shot, from what I can tell. Have to order a new one from the city. How long will that take? Claire asked, concern evident in her voice. 3 days, maybe 4, Roy replied apologetically. Not many shops keep parts for fancy imports like yours in stock around here. Claire's shoulders slumped slightly. I see. Is there a hotel in Riverdale where I could stay until it's repaired? Roy and Matthew exchanged glances. Riverdale Inn's been closed for renovation, Roy explained. Nearest place would be the Highway Motel out on Route 16, but that's... He trailed off, clearly reluctant to describe the establishment to someone like Claire. Not suitable, Matthew finished for him. Then, surprising himself, he added, You're welcome to stay here until your car's fixed. I have a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. Claire's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. Matthew insisted, though part of him wondered what he was thinking, offering his home to a complete stranger. Like Roy said, options are limited around here. Roy nodded in agreement. Mr. Walsh is right, ma'am. And in this heat, you'd be better off somewhere with solid walls. That motel's air conditioning hasn't worked right since the 90s. Claire looked between the two men, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. If you're certain it's no trouble, I accept your offer, Mr. Walsh. Just until my car is repaired. Matthew, he corrected her. If you're staying under my roof, might as well use my first name. Matthew, she repeated with a small smile. And please, call me Claire. After Roy departed with promises to work as quickly as possible on the car, Matthew showed Claire to the spare bedroom. It had once belonged to his parents, but since their passing 5 years ago, it had served mainly as storage. He had cleared it out half-heartedly a year ago, thinking he might rent it out for extra income, but never got around to advertising. The bathroom's down the hall, he explained, opening the window to let in some fresh air. Shower's temperamental, but the water's clean. Towels are in the closet by the sink. Claire set her handbag on the bed, looking around the simple room with its faded quilt and hand-me-down furniture. This is perfect. Thank you again for your hospitality. Matthew nodded awkwardly, unused to having a guest, especially one so clearly out of place in his humble home. I'll let you rest. Dinner's at 6, nothing special, just some stew from the freezer. I'm sure it will be delicious, Claire said. And perhaps I could help? I'm feeling much better now. Matthew almost refused out of politeness but reconsidered. Having someone to talk to during the evening routine might be a nice change from his usual solitude. Sure, if you'd like. Kitchen's yours too, while you're here. He left her to settle in, returning to the irrigation system he had abandoned earlier. The task seemed less daunting now, the heat less oppressive. Though nothing had actually changed. Perhaps it was just the novelty of having someone else around, a reminder that the world extended beyond the boundaries of his struggling farm. As Matthew worked, his thoughts kept returning to his unusual guest, Claire Bennett, architect. What had she meant about being interested in stories like his? And what was she doing on this remote road to begin with? Riverdale wasn't exactly a hub for high-end architectural projects. By the time evening approached, Matthew had managed to get the irrigation system functioning again, at least temporarily. He returned to the house, washing the day's grime from his hands and face before entering the kitchen. To his surprise, Claire was already there. Her sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables on the cutting board. She had changed into more casual clothes, though they still looked expensive, and had pulled her hair back in a loose ponytail. Hope you don't mind, she said, noticing his startled expression. I found the stew in the freezer and thought I'd add some fresh vegetables to it. Not at all, Matthew assured her, moving to the stove to check the pot that now simmered with rich aromas. Smells fantastic. I took the liberty of exploring your garden, Claire explained, gesturing to the array of vegetables on the counter. You grow wonderful produce. It's not much, Matthew said modestly, just enough for personal use. The commercial fields are out back. What's left of them anyway? Claire paused in her chopping, studying him with those assessing eyes again. Have you always been a farmer? Matthew nodded, pulling plates from the cabinet. Born and raised here, 4th generation, like I said. Never wanted to be anything else. That's rare these days, Claire remarked. Most people don't follow in their parents' footsteps anymore. And you? Matthew asked, setting the table. Did you always want to be an architect? A warm smile spread across Claire's face. Ever since I was a little girl. I used to build elaborate structures with anything I could find, blocks, books, even my mother's Tupperware. Drove her crazy. Matthew found himself smiling in return. I can imagine. My parents were more practical. Toy tractors for Christmas, junior gardening tools for birthdays. They didn't so much nurture my interest in farming as assume it. Did you ever consider doing something else? Claire asked, scraping the chopped vegetables into the stew pot. Matthew stirred the pot thoughtfully. Once, got offered a football scholarship to State College. Thought about studying agricultural science, coming back with new ideas. What happened? Dad had his first heart attack that spring. Mom couldn't manage the farm alone. Matthew shrugged, as if the sacrifice had been inconsequential. Wasn't much of a choice, really. Claire's expression softened with understanding. Family comes first. It did back then, Matthew agreed, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. Now I'm not sure what I'm fighting to preserve. No wife, no kids. Just land that won't yield and a house that's falling apart. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Claire spoke of cities she had visited for her work, describing buildings and landscapes with such vivid detail that Matthew could almost see them. In return, he shared stories of rural life, the changing seasons on the farm, the community that had once thrived but now dwindled as younger generations sought opportunities elsewhere. Do you ever think of selling? Claire asked, as they cleared the dishes. Starting fresh somewhere else? Matthew shook his head firmly. This land is in my blood. My great-grandfather is buried on that hill overlooking the creek. My grandparents and parents too. When my time comes, I'll join them there. He paused, realizing how morbid that sounded. Besides, who'd buy a failing farm in the middle of a drought? Claire's response was interrupted by the shrill ring of the telephone. Matthew answered it, speaking briefly before hanging up. That was Roy, he explained. Says he's found a radiator for your car, but it won't arrive until the day after tomorrow at the earliest. Claire nodded, accepting the news with equanimity. I expected as much. Small towns, limited resources. I can drive you to Riverdale tomorrow for your meeting if you'd like, Matthew offered. My truck's not as fancy as your car, but it runs. That would be wonderful, thank you, Claire said, genuine gratitude in her voice. The meeting's at 10. It shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. Later, as darkness fell and the house cooled, they sat on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the clear night sky. The heat of the day had given way to a pleasant coolness that hinted at the approaching autumn, still weeks away but promised in the subtle shift of the air. It's beautiful here, Claire remarked, gazing up at the expanse of stars, more visible here than in any city. So peaceful. It is that, Matthew agreed. On nights like this, it's easy to forget the problems, to remember why my ancestors chose this place. Claire turned to look at him, her profile illuminated by the soft glow from the porch light. Tell me about your land. All of it. Not just the fields you're currently farming. The request surprised Matthew, but he found himself speaking freely, describing the 200 acres that comprised his property, the fertile bottomland near the creek that had dried up, the rolling hills where cattle once grazed, the small forest to the north that provided firewood and shelter for wildlife. Claire listened intently, occasionally asking questions about water sources, soil conditions, the direction of prevailing winds. Matthew answered as best he could, puzzled by her specific interest, but flattered by her attention. You said earlier that stories like mine interest you, Matthew finally ventured. What did you mean by that? Claire was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. I'm working on a project. A new approach to rural architecture and land use. Sustainable communities that work with existing farms, enhancing what's already there instead of replacing it. Sounds ambitious, Matthew commented. Is that what the meeting in Riverdale is about? In a way, Claire replied vaguely. It's more of a preliminary survey of potential sites in the region. Matthew nodded, though her explanation left him with more questions than answers. Before he could press further, Claire yawned, covering her mouth apologetically. I'm sorry, she said. It's been a long day. Of course, Matthew said, rising from his chair. You should rest. We'll need to leave by 9 tomorrow to reach Riverdale in time for your meeting. Claire stood as well, pausing at the door to the house. Thank you for dinner and the conversation. Both were exactly what I needed today. Matthew watched as she disappeared into the house, her words echoing in his mind. There was something about Claire Bennett that intrigued him, something beyond her obvious beauty and intelligence, a purpose that she hadn't fully revealed, yet hinted at in her questions about his land. As he followed her inside, securing the door for the night, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Claire was somehow significant, that her breakdown on the road near his farm wasn't merely a coincidence. It was a fanciful thought, one he attributed to too many years of isolation, of conversations primarily with himself. Still, as he settled into bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about his house, Matthew found himself hoping that Claire's car repairs might take longer than expected. It had been a long time since he had enjoyed someone's company as much as he had enjoyed hers today. Morning brought a continuation of the heat wave, the sun rising as a red orb in a cloudless sky. Matthew was up before dawn, as was his habit, completing essential chores before the day grew too hot for physical labor. He fed the few animals that remained on the farm, 2 horses that were more pets than working animals now, a small flock of chickens, and the barn cats that kept the rodent population under control. When he returned to the house, he was surprised to find Claire already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, studying what appeared to be blueprints spread out before her. Morning, he greeted her, pouring himself a mug from the pot she had brewed. Sleep well? Claire hastily rolled up the papers as he approached, tucking them into a leather portfolio. Very well, thank you. Your house has good bones, as we say in my profession. Solid. Restful. Matthew nodded, pleased by the compliment to his ancestral home. Built to last, that was my great-grandfather's motto. Used oak from the property for the framework. It shows, Claire said. Buildings like this have character that modern construction often lacks. Matthew gestured to the portfolio. Working already? Just reviewing some plans for the meeting, Claire explained, her tone casual but her movements suggesting she preferred to keep her work private. I hope you don't mind that I made coffee. Not at all, Matthew assured her, opening the refrigerator to assess breakfast options. Hungry? I can make eggs, from chickens you met last night. Claire smiled at his small joke. That sounds wonderful. Can I help? Together they prepared a simple breakfast, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease, as if they had done this dance before. Matthew found himself enjoying the companionship, the shared routine that made the old house feel more alive than it had in years. As they ate, Claire asked more questions about the area, about Riverdale and its economy, about neighboring farms and the challenges they faced. Matthew answered openly, describing the slow decline of the region, the family farms sold to corporations, the young people who left for cities and never returned. It's a common story across rural America, Claire said, her expression thoughtful. But it doesn't have to be the end of the story. What do you mean? Matthew asked, intrigued by the conviction in her voice. Rural communities have value beyond agricultural output, Claire explained, warming to her subject. They're custodians of land, of traditions, of knowledge that urban areas lack. With the right approach, they can be revitalized. Sounds like you've given this a lot of thought, Matthew observed, studying her animated features. Claire nodded. A hint of something embarrassment, pride, coloring her cheeks. It's become something of a mission for me. finding ways to preserve what's worth preserving while adapting to new realities. Noble goal, Matthew said, rising to clear their plates. Not sure how achievable it is in places like this, though. Too far gone, some would say. I disagree, Claire stated firmly. No place is too far gone if the foundation is still strong. And from what I've seen of your farm, the foundation is very strong indeed. The drive to Riverdale was mostly silent, both lost in their own thoughts, as Matthew's old truck rumbled along the dusty roads. The small town appeared suddenly as they crested a hill. A collection of buildings clustered around what had once been a thriving main street, but now showed signs of economic distress. Empty storefronts outnumbered operating businesses, and the few people visible moved with the slow deliberation of those with nowhere particular to be. Not much to look at, Matthew apologized as they drove through the town center. Used to be different, when the mining operations were still running and family farms surrounded the area. It has potential, Claire said, her eyes taking in every detail of the buildings, the layout of the streets, the natural features visible beyond the town limits. Where's your meeting? Town hall, Matthew directed, pointing to a modest brick building at the end of the main street. Want me to wait for you? Claire shook her head. No need. It might run long, and I don't want to keep you from your work. Is there a cafe or somewhere I can get lunch afterward? We could meet there. Daisy's Diner, Matthew suggested, indicating a small establishment with faded awnings. Only decent place left in town. Around 1? Perfect, Claire agreed, gathering her portfolio as he parked in front of the town hall. Thank you for the ride. I'll see you at 1. Matthew watched as she entered the building, her posture straightening, her walk becoming more purposeful, as if she were donning a professional persona along with the formal clothes she had changed into for the meeting. It was a reminder that the woman who had shared his breakfast table this morning belonged to a different world. What of boardrooms and blueprints rather than barns and broken-down irrigation systems? With time to kill, Matthew decided to run a few errands, picking up supplies at the feed store and checking in with Roy about the progress on Claire's car. The news wasn't encouraging. Parts coming from further away than I thought, Roy explained, wiping greasy hands on a shop towel. Might not be here till Thursday, maybe even Friday. Matthew felt a conflicting mix of disappointment for Claire and a selfish pleasure at the prospect of her extended stay. I'll let her know. She's in a meeting at Town Hall now. Roy's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Town Hall? With Mayor Thompson in them? What for? Matthew realized he didn't actually know the specifics of Claire's meeting. Some architectural survey, she said. Potential sites for a project. Huh, Roy grunted, his expression speculative. Interesting timing, what with the county development proposal and all. What county development proposal? Matthew asked, suddenly alert. Roy looked at him in surprise. You haven't heard? County's looking to buy up distressed properties, create some kind of tourism center, then all over the town bulletin board for weeks. Matthew frowned. He rarely came into town these days, and when he did, it was for specific errands, not to catch up on local news. What kind of tourism center? Water park? Resort? That kind of thing. Roy shrugged, playing up the river angle, even though it's half dry most of the year now. Desperate attempt to bring some life back to the area, if you ask me. The information settled uneasily in Matthew's stomach. Claire's interest in his land, her questions about water sources and topography, took on a new significance in light of this revelation. Was she part of this county initiative? Was her breakdown near his farm not coincidence, but calculation? By the time 1 o'clock approached, Matthew's mood had darkened considerably. He waited at a corner table in Daisy's Diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had grown cold, his thoughts churning with suspicion and a sense of betrayal that he knew was premature but couldn't shake. Claire arrived precisely at 1, her face flushed with what appeared to be excitement. She slid into the booth across from him, barely containing a smile. Sorry if I kept you waiting. The meeting ran exactly as long as I expected. How did it go? Matthew asked, his tone carefully neutral. Very well, Claire replied, her enthusiasm undimmed by his lackluster response. The board was receptive to my preliminary ideas. Of course, there's a long way to go, but it's a promising start. I hear there's a county development proposal in the works, Matthew said, watching her face closely. Some kind of tourist attraction. Would your project be part of that? Claire's smile faltered, confusion crossing her features. County development? No, that's not related to my work at all. Where did you hear that? Around, Matthew said vaguely, unwilling to reveal his source. Seems like there's a lot of interest in this area suddenly. For a place that's been ignored for decades. Claire studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she picked up on his shift in attitude. Matthew, if there's something on your mind, I'd prefer you just ask me directly. The waitress interrupted before he could respond, taking their orders with the efficient weariness of someone who had been serving the same menu for too many years. When she departed, Claire leaned forward, her voice low but firm. I'm not part of any county tourism scheme, if that's what you're wondering. My interest in this area is quite different. Then what exactly is your interest? Matthew challenged. You show up out of nowhere, ask a lot of questions about my land, have mysterious meetings at town hall. What am I supposed to think? Claire sat back, a flash of hurt crossing her face before it was replaced by a cooler, more professional expression. I suppose I have been somewhat vague about my purposes. It's a habit in my line of work, not disclosing too much too soon. But you've been kind to me, and you deserve honesty. She reached into her portfolio and extracted a business card, sliding it across the table. Matthew picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the embossed text. Claire Bennett, founder and principal architect, Bennett Sustainable Design, he read aloud. Below the name was a list of awards and credentials that meant little to Matthew, but clearly signified importance. You own your own firm? I do, Claire confirmed. A rather successful one, to be blunt. We specialize in what we call regenerative architecture, designs that not only minimize environmental impact, but actively improve their surroundings over time. Matthew turned the card over in his fingers, trying to reconcile this new information with the woman who had collapsed in his arms just yesterday. And the meeting today? Was with the town council, yes, but not about tourism. I'm exploring sites for a demonstration project, something that showcases our approach to rural revitalization. Claire paused, watching his reaction carefully. Your farm, Matthew, has every quality I look for in a potential site. The waitress returned with her food, providing Matthew with a moment to process Claire's revelation. When they were alone again, he set the business card down between them, a barrier and a bridge all at once. So, the car breaking down, the heat, exhaustion, that was all what? A ploy to scout my property? The hurt in his voice was evident despite his attempt to sound nearly curious. Claire's expression softened. No, absolutely not. The car really did overheat, and I genuinely suffered heat exhaustion. Those weren't planned. She hesitated, then admitted. But I was in the area because of your farm. I'd identified it as a potential site from satellite imagery and county records, and I wanted to see it firsthand before approaching you formally. County records, Matthew repeated flatly. You mean the foreclosure notice? Among other things, yes, Claire acknowledged. Look, Matthew, my company doesn't just build pretty, eco-friendly buildings. We create integrated systems that revitalize struggling agricultural operations. I believe your farm could be the perfect demonstration site for our approach in this region. Matthew's instinct was to be defensive, to view Claire's interest as predatory, another outsider looking to capitalize on his misfortune. But the sincerity in her eyes gave him pause. What exactly are you proposing? Claire took a deep breath, as if relieved to finally share her vision. A partnership. We would invest in renovating your farmhouse and outbuildings, constructing additional structures using sustainable methods and materials. The farm would continue to operate, but with updated systems, water catchment, renewable energy generation, permaculture principles applied to your fields. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Matthew asked, still skeptical. A showcase, Claire answered without hesitation. A living example of our philosophy, a place we can bring potential clients, a testing ground for new ideas. In exchange, you get to keep your land, modernize your operation without incurring debt, and share in the profits from educational programs and tourism, the thoughtful kind, not water parks. Matthew pushed his untouched food aside, leaning forward. This sounds too good to be true. Why my farm? There must be easier properties to acquire, ones without stubborn farmers attached. Claire smiled, a genuine warmth returning to her expression. That's precisely why. The human element is essential to our approach. We don't want to create soulless eco-villages. We want to enhance existing communities, existing histories. Your connection to this land, your knowledge of it, your commitment, these are assets as valuable as the physical property. The discussion continued throughout lunch, Claire outlining her vision in greater detail, while Matthew listened, his initial suspicion gradually giving way to cautious interest. By the time they finished eating, his mind was swimming with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. I'm not asking for an answer today, Claire assured him, as they prepared to leave the diner. Take time to think about it. I can send you detailed proposals, examples of our previous projects. And if I say no? Matthew asked. Then we part as friends, and I find another site, Claire said simply. This only works if you believe in it too, Matthew. It can't be imposed. The drive back to the farm was quieter than the journey into town, but the silence was different, contemplative, rather than tense. Matthew found himself studying his land with new eyes as they passed fields he had all but written off, seeing potential where he had previously seen only failure. As they pulled into the driveway, Claire spoke up. Would you mind showing me around the property? Properly, I mean. I'd like to see everything, if you're willing. Matthew hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let me change into more suitable clothes for walking, and I'll give you the grand tour. An hour later, they set out on foot, Claire now dressed in borrowed boots too large for her and a wide-brimmed hat Matthew had found in a closet. Despite the heat, she seemed energized, taking notes in a small book she carried, occasionally stopping to photograph something with her phone when service allowed. Matthew showed her everything, the productive areas and the failed ones, the natural features and the man-made structures, the places he loved, and the places that caused him grief. He found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, sharing his dreams for the farm as well as the harsh realities that had crushed those dreams. Claire listened intently, her questions incisive but never judgmental. As the afternoon progressed, Matthew realized she understood farming better than he had given her credit for, recognizing issues with soil compaction, water runoff, and microclimate factors that he hadn't fully appreciated despite living here all his life. They paused at the top of a hill overlooking the farm, seeking shade under a lone oak tree that had survived countless summers. From this vantage point, the entirety of Matthew's property was visible, a patchwork of fields, woods, and structures spread across the rolling landscape. Your great-grandfather chose well, Claire remarked, her gaze sweeping across the vista. This land has tremendous potential, despite its current challenges. You really think it can be saved? Matthew asked, allowing himself to voice the hope he had been afraid to acknowledge. Claire turned to face him, her expression serious but optimistic. More than saved, Matthew. Transformed. Not into something unrecognizable, but into a better version of what it already is. They continued their exploration until the setting sun warned of approaching darkness. By the time they returned to the house, Matthew felt physically exhausted but mentally invigorated in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Claire's vision was infectious, her belief in the farm's potential rekindling his own fading faith. After a simple dinner, they sat at the kitchen table, Claire sketching rough ideas on a pad while describing possible enhancements to the property. Matthew found himself contributing, pointing out challenges she hadn't considered but also opportunities she hadn't noticed. The barn could be retrofitted with solar panels, Claire suggested, her pencil flying across the paper. South-facing roof, excellent exposure. Winter would be an issue, Matthew cautioned. We get ice storms that could damage panels. Heated elements embedded in the mounting system, Claire countered, making a note. We've developed a solution for that in our northern projects. And so it went. Problem and solution, challenge and opportunity. Their exchange flowing naturally as if they had been collaborating for years rather than hours. When Claire finally put down her pencil, the rough sketch had evolved into a preliminary design that maintained the character of Matthew's farm while introducing elements that seemed both futuristic and perfectly at home in the rural landscape. "It's just a concept," Claire cautioned, seeing the wonder in Matthew's eyes as he studied the drawing. "The final design would require proper surveys, engineering assessments, environmental impact studies." "It's extraordinary," Matthew said simply. "Even if nothing comes of it, thank you for showing me what could be possible." Claire's phone chimed with a message, breaking the moment. She checked it, then looked up with a rueful smile. "Roy says your part won't arrive until Friday at the earliest. I hope your hospitality extends that long." "Stay as long as you need," Matthew assured her, surprised by how much he meant it. "The company is welcome." Over the next 2 days, a routine developed. Matthew would rise early to tend to essential farm tasks, while Claire would work on her laptop, making calls when the spotty cell service permitted. They would meet for meals, sharing ideas and stories, then spend afternoons exploring different aspects of the property, Claire's notebook filling with observations and sketches. On the 3rd day of Claire's stay, they ventured to the far quarter of the property where a small creek, reduced to a trickle by the drought, marked the boundary. Claire crouched by the waterway, testing the soil with her fingers, then looked up at Matthew with excitement. "The water table is higher here than I expected," she said. "With the right catchment system, we could create a substantial reservoir, enough to irrigate at least 30 acres even in drought conditions." Matthew shook his head in disbelief. "I've had water specialists out here 3 times in the last 5 years. They all said the same thing: not enough consistent flow to justify the investment in infrastructure." "They were thinking conventionally," Claire explained, rising and brushing dirt from her hands. "Our approach combines multiple small interventions rather than one large one. Swales on the contour lines, keyline design principles, a series of interconnected ponds rather than one large reservoir." She continued outlining the water management strategy as they walked, Matthew struggling to follow some of the technical details, but grasping the essential concept. By working with the natural topography and using the farm's entire surface area as a water collection system, they could dramatically increase moisture retention even with minimal rainfall. "The initial investment is significant," Claire acknowledged as they neared the house, "but the long-term benefits far outweigh the costs. And with our involvement, those costs would be shared." Matthew nodded, his mind already calculating potential yields if water were no longer the limiting factor it had been for years. The numbers were promising, even conservative estimates suggesting a return to profitability within 3 years. As they approached the farmhouse, Matthew noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked in the driveway, a black SUV with government plates. Standing on the porch was Harold Thompson, the mayor of Riverdale, and beside him, a woman in a business suit Matthew didn't recognize. "Were you expecting visitors?" Claire asked quietly, noting the tension that had suddenly appeared in Matthew's posture. "No," Matthew replied, quickening his pace. "Mayor Thompson rarely ventures out to the farms unless he wants something." They reached the porch, Matthew nodding a cautious greeting to the visitors. "Mayor, what brings you out this way?" Harold Thompson, a portly man with the practiced smile of a career politician, extended his hand. "Matthew, good to see you. Hope we're not intruding. When I heard Claire Bennett was staying out here, I thought I'd pay a personal visit." Matthew glanced at Claire, noting the professional mask that had slipped over her features. "You two know each other?" "We met at the town council meeting," Claire explained, her tone neutral. "Mayor Thompson was kind enough to provide some historical context for the area, among other things," the mayor added, with a meaningful look at Claire. Ms. Bennett made quite an impression on the council with her presentation. The woman beside the mayor cleared her throat pointedly, and Thompson started. "Oh, forgive me. This is Diane Mercer from the County Economic Development Office. She's been spearheading our revitalization initiatives." Diane Mercer offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her handshake perfunctory. "Mr. Walsh, Ms. Bennett, I've been looking forward to meeting you both." Matthew invited them inside, his farmer's hospitality overriding his personal reservations. As they settled in the living room, the air grew thick with unspoken agendas. Mayor Thompson accepted a glass of iced tea, taking a long drink before addressing the reason for their visit. "I'll be direct, Matthew. The county's interested in acquiring properties in this area for development. Your farm is on our list of potential acquisitions." Matthew stiffened, his suspicions confirmed. "My farm's not for sale, Meyer." Diane Mercer leaned forward, her voice smooth but firm. "Mr. Walsh, we understand your attachment to the property, but given your current financial situation, the county's offer represents a generous opportunity to resolve your debts and start fresh." "How generous?" "How generous?" Matthew asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Mayor Thompson named a figure that, while higher than the property's current market value given its condition, was far less than its historical worth or potential value if rehabilitated. Plus full debt forgiveness, of course. Matthew felt Claire shift beside him on the sofa, but didn't look at her. "And what would the county do with my land?" Diane Mercer produced a glossy folder from her briefcase, opening it to reveal renderings of the sprawling resort complex. The Riverdale Recreation Center would create jobs, attract tourism, revitalize the entire region's economy. The images showed Matthew's farm transformed beyond recognition, his fields replaced by manicured lawns and artificial lakes, his farmhouse and barn demolished to make way for modern hotel buildings and recreational facilities. It was a vision of progress that erased every trace of the history he had spent his life preserving. "Water features seem ambitious in a drought," Claire observed, her tone professionally skeptical. "We've secured federal grants for a pumping station and pipeline from the reservoir 50 miles south," Meyer Thompson explained, clearly pleased to demonstrate the project's viability. "Guaranteed water supply, regardless of local conditions, which will further deplete an already stressed watershed," Claire noted, earning a sharp look from Diane Mercer. "Ms. Bennett, I understood you were here on vacation," Mercer said, her polite tone barely masking her irritation. "Or is Bennett's sustainable design now expanding into rural water management?" The tension in the room ratcheted higher as the two women engaged in a silent battle of wills. Matthew, sensing the underlying currents but not fully understanding them, decided to reclaim control of the conversation. "I appreciate the county's interest," he said firmly. "But as I told the bank and now I'm telling you, this farm is not for sale. Not to developers, not to the county, not to anyone." Meyer Thompson sighed, exchanging a glance with Mercer before addressing Matthew again. "I respect your position, but I urge you to consider the reality of your situation. The bank's foreclosure process will continue regardless of your wishes. The county's offer gives you some agency in the outcome, some compensation for your loss." "The foreclosure isn't final yet," Matthew countered. "I have until the end of summer to settle the debt." Diane Mercer's smile was cool and confident. "And how do you propose to do that, Mr. Walsh? Miracle crop in this drought? Hidden treasure under the barn?" Before Matthew could respond, Claire spoke up. "Actually, Mr. Walsh and I have been discussing a potential partnership that would address his financial situation while preserving the agricultural nature of the property." All eyes turned to Claire, surprise evident on every face, including Matthew's. Though they had spent days exploring possibilities, they had yet to formalize any agreement. Diane Mercer recovered first, her expression hardening. "Ms. Bennett, while your firm's reputation is impressive, I fail to see how your architectural projects could generate sufficient capital to save a failing farm in this time frame." "Not just architectural projects," Claire clarified, her confidence unwavering. "Bennett's Sustainable Design has established an investment fund specifically for rural revitalization initiatives. Mr. Walsh's farm meets all our criteria for participation in the program." Matthew struggled to keep his expression neutral, realizing that Claire was presenting their theoretical discussions as a concrete plan, one that apparently involved financial resources she hadn't previously mentioned. Mayor Thompson looked uncertain for the first time. "This is the first I'm hearing of such a fund. Your presentation to the council mentioned design services, not investment capital." "The presentation was preliminary, as I stated at the time," Claire reminded him. "My firm's full proposal will be submitted next week, including detailed financial projections and funding commitments." Diane Mercer's skepticism was palpable. "And these funding commitments would include paying off Mr. Walsh's considerable bank debts?" "Among other investments, yes," Claire confirmed, her gaze steady. Our model isn't charity, Ms. Mercer. It's strategic partnership with landowners who share our vision for sustainable rural economies. The conversation continued in this vein for another 30 minutes, Claire providing just enough specifics to make her claims credible while avoiding details that might be challenged. Matthew listened in growing amazement as she outlined a vision for his farm that merged their private discussions with what appeared to be an established program of her firm. When the visitors finally departed, their confident demeanor somewhat diminished, Matthew turned to Claire with a mixture of confusion and admiration. Investment fund? Rural revitalization program? Were you planning to mention these to me at some point? Claire had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. They exist, but they're newer than I might have implied. Your farm would be our first major project under the initiative. She hesitated, then added, I may have accelerated our timeline a bit in response to their pressure tactics. So you were bluffing? Matthew asked, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. Not entirely, Claire assured him. Everything I describe is within our capability. The papers just haven't been finalized yet. Matthew ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the implications. Claire, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't afford to pin my hopes on something that might not materialize in time. The bank won't extend my deadline based on promises. They will if those promises come with financial guarantees, Claire said, her expression turning serious. Matthew, I believe in this project. I'm prepared to personally guarantee the bank loans while we formalize the partnership agreement. The offer stunned Matthew into momentary silence. You barely know me. Why would you take such a risk? Claire moved to the window, gazing out at the farm bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Because sometimes you have to trust your instincts. My instinct tells me this place is worth saving, and you're the right partner for this project. Matthew joined her at the window, seeing his land through her eyes not as a burden of debt and toil, but as a canvas of possibility. And if it fails, if your vision doesn't translate to reality, then we'll have tried, Claire said simply. Better than surrendering to water parks and artificial lakes, don't you think? Despite his lingering concerns, Matthew found himself nodding in agreement. Much better. The following day brought Roy Jenkins with Claire's repaired car, along with news that amplified the urgency of their situation. Heard at the garage that the county's making offers on 3 other properties surrounding yours, Roy informed them as he handed Claire her keys. Moving fast, from what I gather. Claire absorbed this information with a thoughtful frown. They're creating a contiguous development area. Smart strategy. Matthew's concern deepened. Does that affect our plans? It complicates things, Claire admitted. But it also confirms we're on the right track. This area has real potential, or they wouldn't be investing so heavily. With her car repaired, there was no longer any practical reason for Claire to remain at the farm. Yet, as they stood in the driveway beside her vehicle, neither seemed eager to conclude their unexpected collaboration. I should get back to my office, Claire said eventually. Start the formal process, draw up proper proposals. Matthew nodded, trying to mask his disappointment at her departure. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2 for the complete package, Claire estimated. But I'll send preliminary documentation as soon as possible for the bank, to secure your position while we work out the details. And then what? Matthew asked, the future suddenly seeming both brighter and more uncertain than it had in years. Claire smiled, the professional architect momentarily giving way to the woman who had shared his table and his dreams for the past few days. Then we build something remarkable together. She handed him a business card, different from the one she had shown him at the diner. This one had her personal cell number written on the back. Call me anytime, and I'll be back next weekend to continue our site assessment, if that's all right with you. My door's always open, Matthew assured her, the phrase carrying more meaning than it would have just days ago. After Claire's departure, the farmhouse seemed unnaturally quiet, the absence of her voice and ideas leaving a tangible emptiness. Matthew threw himself into work, tackling long-neglected repairs with renewed purpose. If this farm was to become a showcase for sustainable design, he was determined to have its bones as sound as possible before the transformation began. True to her word, Claire sent preliminary documentation with Indaza professional proposals on Bennett's sustainable design letterhead. financial statements demonstrating the firm's capacity to fulfill its commitments, and most crucially, a letter of intent that Matthew presented to his bank manager with barely concealed satisfaction. "This is unexpected," the manager Philip Greaves remarked as he reviewed the documents. "Bennett Sustainable Design is a significant firm. How did you come to partner with them?" "Good fortune," Matthew replied simply, unwilling to share the personal story of Claire's breakdown and their subsequent connection. "They're interested in rural demonstration projects, and my property meets their criteria." Philip studied the financial guarantees with the careful scrutiny of a man whose job demanded skepticism. "These appear to be in order, though we'll need to verify them through proper channels." "Of course," Matthew agreed, more confident than he had been in years. "The firm's reputation speaks for itself, I believe." By the end of the week, the bank had confirmed Claire's financial guarantees and agreed to suspend foreclosure proceedings pending the finalization of the partnership agreement. Matthew shared the news with Claire during their nightly phone call, a habit that had developed since her departure. "That's excellent progress," Claire responded, her voice warm even through the sometimes patchy connection. "I've been advancing things on my end as well. The board has approved the initial investment package. We're good to proceed as soon as the agreements are signed." "When will that be?" Matthew asked, surprised by his own eagerness. "I'll bring everything when I come this weekend," Claire promised. "And I'll be bringing someone else as well, if that's okay. My lead environmental engineer, Lily Chen. She needs to conduct some soil and water tests to finalize the design parameters." The weekend arrived with Matthew spending Friday in a flurry of cleaning and preparation that he tried to pretend wasn't specifically for Claire's return. When her car appeared on the road Saturday morning, accompanied by a second vehicle presumably containing the environmental engineer, he found himself watching from the porch with an anticipation that went beyond professional interest. Claire emerged from her car looking more like the professional architect he had glimpsed in Riverdale than the casual house guest of the previous week. Her crisp linen suit and carefully styled hair projected competence and authority, yet her smile when she spotted him on the porch held genuine warmth. "Matthew," she greeted him, extending her hand in a gesture that felt oddly formal after their previous intimacy. "Good to see you again." "Likewise," he replied, shaking her hand and noticing the subtle scent of her perfume, something he hadn't registered during her previous stay, when overheat exhaustion had been more prominent. "How was the drive?" "Much more pleasant when the car functions properly," Claire said with a laugh. She turned to introduce the woman who had emerged from the second vehicle. "This is Lily Chen, our environmental engineering genius. Lily, meet Matthew Walsh, the farmer with the perfect property for our pilot project." Lily Chen was younger than Matthew had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with an energetic demeanor and keen eyes that were already assessing the landscape around them. "Mr. Walsh? It's a pleasure. Claire hasn't stopped talking about this place since she returned." "All good things, I hope," Matthew said, suddenly self-conscious about his faded jeans and work shirt in the presence of these two polished professionals. "Absolutely," Lily assured him. "I've been reviewing the preliminary site data, and I can't wait to see it firsthand. The watershed potential alone is fascinating." The day proceeded with Lily conducting various tests across the property, collecting soil samples, measuring gradients, and documenting existing water patterns. Claire alternated between assisting her colleague and reviewing the partnership documents with Matthew at the kitchen table. "This section outlines the financial structure," Claire explained, pointing to a complex diagram. "Essentially, my firm provides the capital for infrastructure improvements and new construction. You contribute the land and your agricultural expertise. Profits from both the farming operation and the educational components are shared according to this formula." Matthew studied the numbers carefully. The arrangement was more generous than he had anticipated, leaving him with substantial control over daily operations and a significant share of potential revenues. "This seems heavily weighted in my favor," he observed. Claire nodded, unperturbed by his assessment. "The intangible value of your generations of knowledge and connection to this land isn't easily quantified, but it's essential to the project's success. We're not just buying a location, Matthew. We're investing in a partnership that includes your expertise and commitment." End quote. As the afternoon progressed, Matthew's initial concerns about the legal complexities gradually eased. Claire had anticipated his questions, explaining each provision in terms he could understand without talking down to him. By evening, they had reviewed the entire agreement, with Matthew requesting only minor modifications to ensure he retained certain traditional uses of specific portions of the property. Lily rejoined them as they concluded, her enthusiasm evident despite the long day of fieldwork. "This place has even more potential than I expected," she announced, accepting the glass of iced tea Matthew offered. "The soil composition is perfect for our water management approach, and the existing contours will minimize earth-moving requirements." Translation for the non-engineer? Matthew requested with a smile. "It means we can work with what's already here," Lily explained. "Less disruption, lower costs, better results. Your great-grandfather chose this land well." The praise for his ancestor pleased Matthew more than he would have expected. He had a good eye for land. Always said you could tell the health of a place by the trees that grew on it. "Smart man," Lily agreed. "Those oak groves on the north slope tell a story about soil depth and water retention that my fancy equipment just confirms." They shared a simple dinner, the conversation flowing easily between technical planning and personal anecdotes. Matthew found himself enjoying the company of these educated city dwellers more than he would have thought possible a week ago, finding common ground in their shared appreciation for the land despite their different perspectives. After dinner, Lily excused herself to compile her data, retreating to the guest room with her laptop and equipment. Claire and Matthew moved to the porch, watching as fireflies began to appear in the gathering dusk, their intermittent lights punctuating the deepening blue of evening. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Matthew said after a comfortable silence. "This partnership, this transformation of the farm." Claire nodded, her profile illuminated by the soft porch light. "It is. Are you having second thoughts?" "Not second thoughts," Matthew clarified. "More like disbelief. A week ago I was facing foreclosure, the end of 4 generations on this land. Now I'm discussing water catchment systems and educational programs with a world-class architect. And life takes unexpected turns," Claire observed. "Sometimes a car breaking down on a country road can change everything." Matthew glanced at her, catching a hint of something deeper in her expression. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why this? Why rural revitalization? From what I've seen on your website, your firm could be designing skyscrapers in Shanghai or museums in Paris. Why focus on struggling farms in the middle of nowhere?" Claire was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I grew up on a farm not unlike this one," she finally said. "Southern Ohio, small operation, family-owned for generations. My father lost it when I was 12 drute, debt. The same story playing out across rural America." The revelation surprised Matthew. Nothing in Claire's polished demeanor had suggested agricultural roots. "What happened?" "We moved to Cincinnati, started over. My father never recovered, not really. Spent the rest of his life working other people's land, blaming himself for losing ours." Claire's voice held old pain, carefully contained but still present. "I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd find ways to prevent other families from experiencing that loss. So, this project, it's personal for you," Matthew said, understanding blooming. "All my work is personal," Claire acknowledged. "But this project, this farm, yes, it's special. When I saw your property in the county records, read about the foreclosure proceedings, something clicked. It wasn't just another potential site. It felt like the perfect place to begin making good on that childhood promise." The honesty of her answer touched Matthew deeply. "Thank you for telling me that. And for what you're doing here." "We haven't done anything yet," Claire reminded him with a gentle smile. "The hard work is still ahead." "But we will," Matthew said with newfound confidence. Together. The next morning brought the formal signing of the partnership agreement, witnessed by Lily and documented with photographs for the firm's records. As Matthew set down the pen after signing the final page, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "Congratulations, partners," Lily said, raising her coffee mug in a toast. To the Walsh Bennett demonstration farm. The name needs work, Claire laughed, tapping her mug against Lily's. But the sentiment is perfect. After finalizing the immediate next steps and establishing a communication schedule, Claire and Lily prepared to depart, their vehicles loaded with samples and data that would inform the detailed design work to come. As they said their goodbyes, Claire handed Matthew a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. A partnership gift, she explained. Open it after we've gone. The women departed with promises to return within 2 weeks, bringing the first team of specialists to begin the initial phase of implementation. Matthew watched their vehicles disappear down the dusty road, the farm suddenly quieter but no longer feeling abandoned or doomed. There was promise now, potential waiting to be realized. Inside, he carefully unwrapped Claire's gift, finding a beautifully bound notebook with handmade paper and a simple leather cover. The first page bore an inscription in Claire's elegant handwriting. For recording the transformation of Walsh Farm, from legacy to future. Every great project begins with a vision, but endures through documentation. Your story deserves to be told. Below the inscription was a sketch of the farmhouse as it currently stood, beside a rendering of what it might become, still recognizably the same structure, but enhanced, renewed. Its essential character preserved while its function expanded. It was Claire's vision made tangible, a promise on paper that matched the legal promise they had formalized that morning. Matthew ran his fingers over the drawing, then turned to a blank page. After a moment's consideration, he began to write, documenting not the future transformation, but the unexpected beginning. A chance breakdown, a woman seeking shade, and a connection that had already transformed San. More than just the land. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Matthew prepared the farm for the coming changes. He cleared out long unused outbuildings, repaired what he could with his limited resources, and began documenting existing conditions as Claire had suggested, creating a baseline against which progress could be measured. When Claire returned, she brought not just Lily, but a team of 4 additional specialists, a solar engineer, a permaculture designer, a construction manager, and a young architect who was apparently Claire's protégé. They arrived in a convoy of vehicles loaded with equipment, setting up what amounted to a field office in one of the cleared barns. We'll be based here for the next 3 months, Claire explained as Matthew helped them unload. The initial phase is the most critical, establishing the core systems that everything else will build upon. The farm quickly transformed from the place of solitary struggle to a hive of purposeful activity. Surveys were conducted, detailed plans drawn, and within days, the first physical changes began to take shape. A crew arrived to install solar panels on the south-facing barn roof, while another team began the careful work of creating swales and catchment ponds for water management. Matthew found himself both participant and observer in the transformation of his property. His knowledge of the land proved invaluable to the technical experts, who modified their plans based on his insights about seasonal changes, wildlife patterns, and the subtle characteristics of different areas of the farm. Claire divided her time between overseeing the work on site and handling necessary business in her main office, sometimes absent for days at a time, but always returning with new ideas and solutions to emerging challenges. During her absences, Matthew was surprised to discover how much he missed not just her professional input, but her company, their evening conversations on the porch having become a highlight of his days. By the end of the first month, tangible progress was evident across the property. The water management system captured the sparse rainfall with remarkable efficiency, the carefully designed contours directing every precious drop to where it was most needed. The solar installation provided more than enough electricity for the farm's current needs, with capacity to spare for future expansion. Word of the project spread through the community, bringing curious neighbors and townspeople to see what was happening at the Walsh farm. Claire, recognizing the importance of local support, encouraged these visits, assigning team members to explain the various components and their benefits. Mayor Thompson and Diane Mercer made an appearance in the 6th week, their skepticism still evident, but tempered by the undeniable progress on display. As Matthew led them around the property, He took particular satisfaction in Mercer's poorly concealed surprise at the transformation already underway. "This is certainly different from the county's proposal," the mayor acknowledged as they surveyed a newly constructed greenhouse that utilized passive solar design and captured rainwater. "More agricultural than recreational." "That's the point," Matthew explained, with more patience than he might have shown weeks earlier. "We're demonstrating that rural land can be productive and sustainable without being converted to entertainment venues." "But the employment potential," Mercer objected. "Our projections showed hundreds of jobs created by the recreation center." "We'll create jobs too," Matthew countered. "Different kinds perhaps, but sustainable ones connected to the land rather than dependent on tourism trends." As if to emphasize his point, a group of college students arrived as they spoke, part of an educational program Claire had arranged with the State University's agricultural department. The students would spend 2 weeks at the farm, learning about integrated design principles while contributing labor to the ongoing projects. Mayor Thompson watched the enthusiastic young people dispersing across the property, their energy and commitment evident in their purposeful movements. "They're certainly motivated," he admitted reluctantly. "The next generation cares about sustainable food systems," Matthew pointed out. "They want to be part of the solution, not just consumers of entertainment." By the time the officials departed, their opposition had softened, if not disappeared entirely. The county's development plans remained active, focusing on properties they had already secured, but the pressure on Matthew's farm had eased, at least temporarily. "They'll be back," Claire predicted that evening as she and Matthew reviewed the day's progress over dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, now upgraded with energy-efficient appliances that preserved its rustic character while reducing consumption. "Once they see the economic potential of what we're creating, they'll want to partner rather than compete." "Would you consider that?" Matthew asked, curious about her long-term vision. Claire considered the question thoughtfully. "Selective collaboration might make sense eventually, not for water parks, but perhaps for complementary services that support our educational mission while providing community benefits." The next major milestone came 2 months into the project, when the first section of rehabilitated farmland produced its initial harvest, a modest yield of drought-resistant crops planted according to permaculture principles. Though small in scale, the success validated the water management approach and soil restoration techniques that had been implemented. Matthew stood in the field, holding a perfectly formed sweet potato in his calloused hand, its vibrant orange flesh exposed where he had sliced it open. Around him, the harvest team gathered similar specimens, expressions of satisfied accomplishment on their faces. "This soil was practically dead 3 months ago," Matthew marveled, turning to Claire who stood beside him, her usual business attire replaced by practical work clothes that had become her uniform during on-site days. "I wouldn't have believed this was possible without chemical intervention. Nature knows how to heal itself when given the right support," Claire replied, her own satisfaction evident in her smile. "Your land still had memory in it, Matthew. All it needed was the right conditions to express itself again." That evening, they celebrated with a harvest meal prepared from the farm's produce. The long table in the newly renovated outdoor pavilion filled with team members, local supporters, and even a few former skeptics who had been won over by the project's initial success. As twilight deepened into night, the gathering took on a festive atmosphere, with local musicians who had arrived spontaneously providing accompaniment to stories and laughter. Matthew found himself observing the scene with a sense of wonder, his farm so long a place of solitary struggle now, vibrant with community and purpose. Claire appeared at his side, offering a glass of locally produced cider. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about what a difference a few months can make," Matthew replied, accepting the drink. "From foreclosure to this." Claire followed his gaze across the gathering. "It's just the beginning. Wait until you see what happens when the educational center is completed next month." The educational center was Claire's particular passion within the project, a purpose-built facility that would host workshops, demonstrations, and research activities related to sustainable agriculture and design. The foundation had been laid, and the timber frame, harvested from the farm's own managed woodland, was scheduled to be raised the following week. "I still have moments when I can't quite believe this is happening," Matthew confessed. "When I expect to wake up and find it was all an elaborate dream, the famous architect, the transformation, all of it." Claire's expression softened. "Not a dream. Though, I'll admit, sometimes it feels that way to me too." Their eyes met, holding for a moment longer than strictly necessary for professional partners. In the months of working together, their relationship had developed a depth that neither had explicitly acknowledged, a connection built on shared vision, but extending into personal territory that remained undefined. The moment was interrupted by Lily, approaching with clipboard in hand. "Sorry to bother you both, but we have a decision to make about the greenhouse orientation. The soil tests came back with unexpected results that might justify a 10-degree adjustment." Business resumed. The personal current submerged beneath the flow of practical matters that demanded attention. Yet Matthew found himself increasingly aware of Claire's presence, not just as the architect transforming his farm, but as the woman whose passion and commitment had come to mean more to him than he had anticipated. The timber frame raising for the educational center became a community event, drawing volunteers from Riverdale and surrounding towns, many curious to see the project that had become a topic of regional burlesque conversation. Using traditional methods supplemented by modern safety equipment, the massive oak beams were hoisted into place, each connection secured with wooden pegs rather than metal fasteners. Claire moved through the organized chaos with calm authority, directing the sequence of operations with the precision of someone who had planned every detail. Matthew worked alongside the volunteer crew, his strength and familiarity with tools making him a natural leader for one of the raising teams. By sundown, the frame stood complete, its silhouette bold against the evening sky. The volunteers gathered beneath the structure for a group photograph, faces tired but triumphant, before dispersing to the food and drink provided as thanks for their efforts. Matthew found Claire standing alone at the edge of the activity, studying the completed frame with a critical eye. "Seeing problems already?" he asked, joining her. "No," she replied, her voice soft with satisfaction. "Seeing fulfillment. The reality matches the vision almost perfectly. That's rare in my profession. It's a beautiful structure." Matthew agreed, admiring the elegant joinery and proportions that managed to be both functional and aesthetically pleasing. "Hard to believe it came from trees on this property. Full circle." Claire nodded. "Materials from the land, returning to serve the land. That's the essence of what we're trying to demonstrate here." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued to admire the frame, now being illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns as darkness deepened. Around them, conversations and laughter created a backdrop of community. The farm now as much a gathering place as a working agricultural operation. "Will you stay?" Matthew asked suddenly, the question emerging before he had fully formulated it in his mind. Claire turned to him, her expression questioning. "Tonight? Of course. We still have the team meeting scheduled for—" "No," Matthew interrupted gently. "I mean when the project is complete. Will you stay involved with the farm, or move on to the next demonstration site?" Understanding dawned in Claire's eyes. That's the more complicated question." "I know you have a business to run," Matthew acknowledged. "Other projects, other clients. I just wondered what your long-term connection to this place might be." Claire considered her answer carefully. "The standard model would be for me to transition to an advisory role once the implementation phase is complete. Visit periodically, monitor outcomes, but primarily focus on new projects elsewhere." Matthew nodded, trying to mask his disappointment with professional understanding. "That makes sense. But," Claire continued, her gaze direct, "this project has never quite fit the standard model, has it? From the beginning, it's been something different. Different. Different how?" "More personal," Claire admitted. "For both of us, I think. My connection to this place, to what we're creating here." She paused, searching for words. "It's not something I'm eager to step away from." The honesty in her statement emboldened Matthew. "I don't want you to step away either." Their conversation was interrupted once again, this time by the construction manager with questions about the next day's schedule. The moment passed, unresolved but acknowledged, a possibility opened between them that would require further exploration. As autumn approached, the pace of transformation accelerated. The educational center was enclosed before the first cold snap, its walls constructed of straw bales plastered with a mixture of clay from the property and lime, creating breathable, super-insulated barriers against winter's approach. Solar thermal panels installed on the south-facing roof provided hot water and radiant floor heating, eliminating the need for fossil fuels even in the coldest months. The farm's production areas continued to expand, with each successful harvest validating the integrated systems approach. Water usage had decreased by 60%, while yield had increased, a combination that defied conventional agricultural wisdom but demonstrated the potential of the regenerative methods being implemented. Word of the project's success spread beyond the local region, attracting visitors from neighboring states and even a documentary crew from a national environmental organization. Claire, recognizing the educational value of such attention, established a visitor protocol that balanced access with the practical needs of a working farm. The bank, which had once been Matthew's adversary, now proudly featured the project in its regional marketing materials, presenting itself as a forward-thinking supporter of sustainable agriculture. Matthew found the irony amusing, but accepted the promotion as beneficial to the farm's growing reputation. By mid-October, the first frost silvered the fields one morning, signaling the transition to the farm's winter mode. The design had anticipated this seasonal shift, with systems adapting to capture and store different resources, the summer's emphasis on shade and water harvesting giving way to solar gain and heat retention. Matthew stood at the kitchen window, watching as the rising sun dissolved the frost into droplets that caught the light like scattered diamonds across the landscape. Behind him, Claire worked at the farmhouse's new dining table, reviewing plans for the next phase of development scheduled to begin in spring. Their working relationship had developed a comfortable rhythm over the months, with Claire now spending 3 or 4 days each week at the farm, returning to her city office for the remainder to oversee her firm's other projects. She had taken to using the farmhouse as her base during these stays, the guest room becoming a semi-permanent office that reflected her growing personal investment in the project. The soil analysis from the north field came back, Matthew said, turning from the window. Organic matter content has increased by 23% since we implemented the cover crop rotation. Claire looked up from her papers, pleasure evident in her expression. That's ahead of projections. The mycorrhizal inoculation must be working better than expected. Lily will be thrilled, Matthew agreed, pouring coffee for them both from the thermal carafe. She was worried about that section, given how depleted it was. Natural systems are remarkably resilient when given the right conditions, Claire observed, accepting the mug he offered. Sometimes all it takes is removing the obstacles to healing, rather than imposing solutions. Matthew sat across from her, struck once again by how her insights often extended beyond agriculture or architecture into philosophical territory that resonated with his own evolving worldview. Sounds applicable to more than just soil. Claire's smile acknowledged the broader implication. Most principles that work well in natural systems have parallels in human ones. That's part of what we're demonstrating here: integration rather than separation. The approaching winter would be a test of that integration, the first full seasonal cycle for the transformed farm. Though the design had anticipated the challenges of cold weather, theory would now meet reality as temperatures dropped and conditions changed. The educational center was officially opened in November, with a ceremony that attracted regional officials, agricultural specialists, and community members curious to see the completed structure. Mayor Thompson, who had once advocated for the county's competing development plan, now stood at the podium praising the innovation and community benefit of the Walsh Farm project, as it had come to be known. This represents a new model for rural development, the mayor declared to the assembled crowd. One that honors agricultural traditions while embracing sustainable technologies. Riverdale is proud to be home to such a pioneering endeavor. Matthew, standing beside Claire as the mayor spoke, leaned close to whisper, "Quite a change of heart since he was trying to buy the farm for water slides." Claire suppressed a smile. Politicians recognize which way the wind is blowing. Our visitor numbers and economic impact reports made a compelling case. Indeed, the project had already created 15 full-time positions and numerous part-time opportunities, with educational programs booked solid through the following summer. Local restaurants and suppliers had benefited from the farm's production, while the increasing number of visitors brought new customer traffic to Riverdale's struggling businesses. After the ceremony, as guests toured the facility and enjoyed refreshments harvested from the farm, Claire and Matthew found themselves momentarily alone in the small office at the rear of the center. Through the window, they could see the gathering, a blend of local residents and out-of-town visitors mingling in the afternoon sunlight. "We did it," Claire said softly, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Phase 1, complete and successful. Better than I dared hope, honestly." Matthew nodded, watching the community that had formed around their shared vision. "It's amazing what can happen when people come together around a common purpose." "It wasn't just the concept that made this work," Claire said, turning to face him directly. "It was you, Matthew. Your knowledge, your connection to this land, your willingness to embrace change while holding on to what matters. And you," Matthew countered, meeting her gaze. "Your vision, your expertise, your belief that this was possible when everyone else, including me, had written it off." The moment between them deepened, months of partnership and unspoken feelings crystallizing into an awareness that could no longer be ignored. Matthew took a step closer, hesitated, then spoke the question that had been forming since that first evening on the porch. "Claire, when this is all finished, when the project is fully implemented and running smoothly, what happens to us?" Her expression softened, vulnerability replacing the professional composure she typically maintained. "What do you want to happen, Matthew?" "I want you to stay," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of both professional appreciation and personal longing. "Not just as a consultant or partner, but as more." Claire's response was interrupted by a knock at the office door, followed immediately by Lily's apologetic face appearing around the edge. "Sorry to interrupt, but the State Agricultural Commissioner just arrived and is asking to speak with you both." The moment paused but did not dissipate, an acknowledgement passing between Matthew and Claire that the conversation would continue when time allowed. They rejoined the celebration, their professional personas seamlessly reassumed while the personal current continued to flow beneath the surface. Winter settled over the farm with a series of snowstorms that blanketed the transformed landscape in white. The educational center remained active with workshops and planning sessions, while the production areas rested beneath cover crops and mulch, the soil building strength for spring planting. Matthew and Claire fell into a winter routine, their evenings often spent before the farmhouse's efficient new wood stove, reviewing the day's progress and planning future developments. These quiet hours gradually saw the boundaries between professional and personal conversations blur, their shared passion for the project expanding to include deeper explorations of their individual journeys, hopes, and dreams. On a particularly cold evening in January, with snow falling steadily outside the windows, Claire shared more details of her childhood on the lost family farm, the pain that had driven her architectural focus, and the satisfaction of seeing that pain transformed into purpose through projects like the one they had created together. "When my father died 3 years ago, his last words to me were about the land we'd lost," she revealed, her voice soft in the dimly lit room. "He said, 'Claire, you found a way to save it after all.' He never saw this place, but somehow he understood what I was trying to do with my work." Matthew reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in a gesture of comfort and connection. "He'd be proud of this. Of you." Claire's fingers tightened around his. "I think so. I hope so." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "What about you, Matthew? Are you proud of what we've created here?" "More than proud," he answered honestly. "Grateful. Amazed. When you collapsed in that heat wave, I thought I was just helping a stranded traveler. I had no idea you were bringing exactly what this place needed, what I needed to survive and thrive again." "Perhaps we brought each other what we needed," Claire suggested, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. "You've given me the opportunity to realize a vision I've held for years, to prove that these methods can work at scale, that rural communities can be revitalized without being reinvented." The fire crackled in the stove, casting warm light across their faces as they sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined. The unspoken shifting gradually toward acknowledgement. Outside, the snow continued to fall, insulating the farmhouse in a blanket of quiet that made the moment feel suspended in time, separate from the demands and complications of the world beyond their created sanctuary. "I've been offered a major project in Seattle," Claire said eventually, her voice cutting through the comfortable silence. "Prestigious, lucrative, exactly the kind of commission most architects would leap at." Matthew felt his heart constrict, though he kept his expression neutral. "Congratulations. That's significant recognition of your work." "I turned it down," Claire continued, watching his reaction carefully. "Yesterday, actually. Called and declined, formally." Surprise and something like hope flickered across Matthew's face. "May I ask why?" "Because accepting would have meant leading here for at least a year during a critical phase of implementation," Claire explained. "And I realized that no project, however prestigious, was worth missing what we're creating here." The emphasis on "we're" hung in the air between them, its meaning extending beyond the professional collaboration to encompass the personal connection that had grown alongside it. "Claire," Matthew began, then paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. "These past months have been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Not just because of what's happening with the farm, but because of us. Working together. Being together. I don't want that to end when the project is complete." Claire rose from her chair, still holding his hand, and moved to stand before him. "Neither do I." The distance between them disappeared as Matthew stood, their months of partnership finding new expression as professional boundaries dissolved into personal connection. The kiss, when it came, felt both inevitable, surprising, a confirmation of what had been building since that first day when fate disguised as a car breakdown had brought them together. When they finally parted, Claire's eyes held both warmth and characteristic pragmatism. "This complicates our professional relationship." "In the best possible way," Matthew suggested, a smile spreading across his features. "Integrated systems, remember? Everything connected, everything serving multiple purposes." Claire laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. "Are you applying permaculture principles to our relationship, Matthew Walsh? If it works for agriculture, why not for us?" he countered, drawing her closer again. "Multifunctional, resilient, adaptive to changing conditions." Their laughter mingled in the space between them. Joy finding expression in the farmhouse that had once been a place of solitary struggle and was now the heart of both professional success and personal happiness. Spring arrived with its familiar promise of renewal, the land awakening with vibrant energy as systems established over the previous year demonstrated their effectiveness. The water management features captured the seasonal rains, directing them to where they were most needed. Fields that had once struggled to produce now offered abundant early crops, their health evident in deep green growth and diverse beneficial insect populations. The partnership between Bennett Sustainable Design and Walsh Farm had evolved into a model that attracted attention from trauma, agricultural programs, environmental organizations, and economic development agencies. Tours had become a regular feature, with Matthew and Claire often leading visitors through the property, explaining the integrated systems that had transformed a failing farm into a showcase of regenerative agriculture. Their personal relationship had developed alongside the professional one, growing deeper as they navigated the balance between their individual roles and their shared vision. Claire had gradually transitioned more of her firm's operations to the farm, establishing a satellite office in the renovated granary where her team could work directly in the environment their designs served. 1 year to the day after Claire's car had broken down on the dusty road beside Matthew's property, they stood together on the hilltop overlooking the transformed landscape. The afternoon sun illuminated the vibrant tapestry they had created together, productive fields arranged in flowing patterns that followed the secre land's natural contours. The educational center with its living roof, now covered in blossoming wildflowers, new structures that harmonized with the historic farm buildings while incorporating advanced sustainable technologies. "Hard to believe it's the same place," Matthew remarked, his arm around Claire's shoulders as they surveyed their creation. "Sometimes I look out and can hardly remember how it was before." "I remember," Claire said, leaning into his embrace. "It was beautiful even then, just waiting for the right conditions to express its potential. Like you. Matthew smiled at the comparison. Like us both, maybe. The right partnership at the right time. From this vantage point, they could see the next phase of development taking shape, an area designated for demonstration housing where visitors could experience living systems similar to those implemented across the Bow Farm. The county, having recognized the economic and educational value of the project, had become a supporter rather than a competitor, incorporating the Walsh farm model into its regional development plans. I got a call from a farmer in Nebraska yesterday. Matthew said, "Read about what we're doing here. Wants to implement something similar on his property." That's the 5th inquiry this month. Claire nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. The model is proving itself, not just environmentally, but economically. That's what will drive adoption more broadly. Speaking of broader adoption, Matthew said, turning to face her directly, "There's something I've been wanting to ask you. About our future." Claire's eyes met his, warmth and curiosity mingling in her gaze. "What about our future?" Matthew took both her hands in his, the farmer's calluses now matched by similar marks on Claire's once pristine architect's fingers, evidence of their shared labor in bringing vision to reality. "This farm has been in my scow family for 4 generations. I'd like to start the 5th. With you." Understanding dawned in Claire's expression, followed by a smile that rivaled the spring sunshine in brightness. "Are you proposing, Matthew Walsh?" "Inelegantly, probably," he admitted with a self-deprecating grin. "But, yes. Will you marry me, Claire? Make this place our home permanently? Not just a demonstration project, but a life we build together?" Claire's answer came without hesitation, as clear and certain as the vision that had brought them together one sweltering summer day when a car breakdown had revealed itself to be the beginning rather than an interruption. Yes, absolutely yes. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, standing on land that had been renewed through their partnership. The farm spread below them in vibrant testament to what was possible when expertise met dedication, when modern innovation respected traditional wisdom. When 2 people from different worlds discovered that their differences created strength rather than division. The struggling farm that had sheltered a stranger during a heat wave had become not just a showcase of sustainable design, but the foundation for a future neither of them could have imagined when their paths first crossed. As personal and professional purposes aligned in perfect integration, Matthew and Claire embraced the next chapter of their shared journey, as committed to each other as they were to the land that had brought them together. What had begun as a chance encounter had blossomed into a partnership that transformed not just a farm, but 2 lives, proving that the most sustainable design of all was one that honored the past while building toward the future, rooted in shared values and nurtured by mutual respect. For Matthew and Claire, the farm had become more than a project or a property. It was the physical embodiment of their love story, growing stronger with each passing season, bearing fruit that would nourish generations to come.